So our panel discussion has a very long and sophisticated name, but heading, but to be frank and short, our main aim is to talk about what we can do in our region, here in our region, to become a functional and effective part of pan-European anti-corruption and anti-fraud mechanism. So, first of all, as my panelists, my colleagues have already been introduced to you, I will go straightly to the questions. So, first of all, now we have more than a year that the European Public Prosecution Office is functional, and it's not only functional, in theory it has already real investigations, real cases which are investigated and prosecuted. So we already can talk about practice. So first of all, I would like to ask our colleague who is representative both of Estonia but also of the European Public Prosecution Office, who is a European Delegated Prosecutor. So, Ms. Kati, could you please share your views on challenges and possibilities which this new system brought to European countries?
Yes, thank you. I don't know, should I?
Yes, yes, you can take it.
Just in case. Thank you. I would firstly like to thank you for the possibility to participate in this panel and to share my views and opinions through an eye on European Delegated Prosecutor. As we all know, the EPO has 22 member states, and all these member states have EDPs, European Delegated Prosecutors, as I am, in all member states working on EPO cases, being located at the same time in their own country. So at first the impression might be that EDPs are all separated and distant, but the reality is that EDPs belonging to the same single office are working very closely together, especially in cross-border investigations whenever it comes up in EPO case. There are presently 115 EDPs as for the data of the last year, 2022, and they all are investigating only EPO cases, and they all are very closely interested in the result of the investigations, especially in cross-border investigations, because all EDPs know that a lot might depend, and even the result might depend on the input and devotion in the cooperation. So I would say that with the start of the activities and the practice of this 1.5 years has shown that the EPO has really given the possibility for more effective, quicker and more coordinated cross-border investigations. Also, EPO regulation gives to the EDPs the possibility to ask assistance from colleague EDPs from another member state by way of a simple request. No official European investigative orders or MLN requests needed. And as already said, being a single office members, all EDPs members of the single office, and having only one priority, EPO cases, financial interests of EU, this so I would say swift help and execution of the requested investigative measures lies on mutual trust, short lines of communication, even if needed only one phone call away, and all the problems and obstacles are discussed on an ongoing basis or even beforehand. It's quite common then that in handling EDP knows already before asking for specific help who the assisting EDP will be. So the matters of the case, the assistance needed, obstacles might be discussed already beforehand. So I would say that the cooperation is really swift. Even during ongoing assistance, the communication and consulting is quite common. It might result in quick change of course, maybe ask additional investigative measures to be implemented, maybe ask the change of investigative measures asked previously. And if you allow me, I would make one comparison here, just crossed my mind, with the European investigative order. When a prosecutor issues an European investigative order, the prosecutor almost never knows who will be the counterpart in another country, who will be responsible for the execution of the European investigative order, to whom to contact, from whom to ask the timeline, and this is the main difference compared with the execution of the European investigative order and the cooperation in cross-border investigations in the frames of EPPO. So I would say that the landscape of cross-border international cooperation in criminal cooperation has surely changed with the start of the EPPO. And this pattern has changed from international cooperation to asking assistance measures from colleagues belonging to the same office. Of course, international cooperation in cross-border investigations is and was possible through with the non-participating member states and with third countries using other international cooperation measures, namely the same European investigative order and MMA requests. But this is as time-consuming for EDP as it is for national prosecutor. But the truth is that EDPs can also use the help of Eurojust, and I personally have used the help of Eurojust when forwarding the European investigative order to a non-participating member state. Then Eurojust kind of provides support in having this monitoring site over the execution of the European investigative order, and I can say that I at least gained the result quite fast. But stressing the mentality of the single office of EPPO and having only one priority, I would say that it's quite well illustrated with the attitude that the deadline set in the assistance request by your colleague EDP is always priority. It is always followed because every EDP knows how much gain you can get from the swift help and cooperation. And as already my colleague, the Vilnius EDP, very rightfully described yesterday, that we know that this help is appreciated. It is valued by your colleague. And as to conclude here, I would provide maybe some statistics that cross-border investigations form 28% out of the all active investigations in EPPO. There are more than 300 active cross-border investigations going on in EPPO, and there have been made more than 900 assistance requests to the colleague EDP during these 1.5 years of practice of EPPO. So the cross-border investigations, the volume of these investigations is quite considerable.
Thank you so much for the introduction of your activities, not only your, but of the European system activities. And as you have already touched the next question, which a topic which corresponds to my next question, which is about information exchange possibilities. You have already introduced the mechanism, how it works, but maybe you can share with us, of course, as far as it is allowed, because it is ongoing investigations, we understand everything, but could you share with us some successful examples of cross-border information exchange?
Yes, since I picked one good example that isn't, of course, any more confidential. It's somewhat published already in the media. Maybe some of you have read about it, Admiral Operation. And I would then give a quick overview of the case. The case was about VAT, carousel fraud, based on the sale of the popular electronic devices, mobile phones, tablets, earphones, and it started out in Portugal. In that operation, more than 33 different EPPO offices were involved. Hereby, I'd like to mention, though EPPO has 22 member states, some bigger member states have several offices all over the country, so that's why more than 33 different EPA offices and 14 EU member states, including one non-member state, Hungary, and more than 30 partners and national authorities were also involved. So the case started out with one missing trader, one strawman in Portugal, and tax officials detected that there might be a huge fraud. The case was reported to EPA in June 2021, and in a year, in July 2022, there were already 56 different cases linked between each other, covering the same scheme. And also, there was discovered that organized criminal group was behind that scheme, and the location of these stolen assets was also detected. At that stage, already from EPO's central office, the operational unit was engaged to provide support in planning this self-admiral operation, and the central support provided help with strategic planning, also to coordinate this practical cooperation between different EU countries. And so, as a result, there was conducted simultaneously during 2 days more than 200 searches in different countries, more than 20 arrests of persons in different countries. Seizure was more than 500 bank accounts in different countries, more than 80 real estate properties, more than 30 luxury cars, over 2.5 million in cash, and more than 100 valuable watches, and airports estimated value around 2 million euros. So altogether it was seized 65 million worth assets during this operation day. And just a couple sentences about this coordination team in central office. EPA has established special departments, special units that can provide help in big investigations where many countries are involved, many different cases are combined into one big circle. Then the central office comes to help with its team to coordinate the strategy, the cooperation between countries, the action day, that everything would go smoothly, the information would gather to one place and be distributed to connected members of the whole group. So this is the possibility EPA also provides. Sometimes I think it has been in practice for too short time to say how much value does it give, because if you have only a couple of countries linked, then you might think as a DDP, how much gain would it give to engage a special unit to support your action day? But if you have already 10 or more member states, then I can see the value of this support unit in this coordination planning.
Thank you so much. We heard a lot of from one of the representatives of the European office, but now let's turn to our colleagues who are representatives of national institutions, because the other three panelists are just, as I mentioned, representatives of national institutions responsible for investigating corruption. So could you please in turn shortly present your views on working with European Prosecution's Office and good experiences and maybe some remaining challenges? So Martynas, could you start?
Thank you. As it was said, EPPO became operational not long time ago, but a few insights from the Lithuanian perspective already can be drawn. So the best indicator that shows a good coordination is the absence of disputes over competence. So far we haven't got one in Lithuania. Usually it is very easy to decide which prosecution service should take the case, but sometimes it happens that one case has more than one crime, and some crimes fall under the competence of the EPPO, and the other under the competence of National Prosecution Service. In such case, we usually use so-called core crime model. If the main crime or the crime who did the most damage falls under the competence of the EPPO, of course, it should be responsible for the case. But if more crime or a more serious crime in the case is under the competence of national authorities, the national prosecutor should be responsible for such a case. However, when an investigation is referred to the EPPO, national prosecutors, as a rule, are no longer involved in the case. Of course, it's not a problem when the EPPO is responsible for the case from the outset, from the beginning, but sometimes it happens that huge ongoing cases might be referred to the EPPO. And this might be an issue of human resources, yes. Because according to our national legislation, I think it's also the same in other countries, it's impossible to allow a European delegated prosecutor and national prosecutor work in one case as together as a leading team or whatsoever. My suggestion would be to consider whether it couldn't be possible to establish such a regulation. We have also another, not an issue, but a small thing to consider. As you know, in Lithuania we have criminal intelligence investigation, and when one is started, it's all the material of such investigation is classified, and only national prosecutors authorized by the Prosecutor General are allowed, have authority to participate in such investigation. On the other hand, we have an obligation to inform the EPPO of every case, every situation that falls under their competence. However, until the trial investigation is started, European delegated prosecutor has no authority to participate in such criminal intelligence investigation. So again, my suggestion would be to consider maybe European delegated prosecutors in Lithuania also could be authorized to participate in criminal intelligence investigation. They would gather some intelligence data, and it would be way easier for them to lead the case once the trial investigation starts. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Very interesting insight, because I think it's like a problem, maybe not problem, but this issue specific not for all European countries, because as far as I am concerned, not all European countries have such an institute as criminal intelligence before criminal investigation according to the Code of Criminal Procedure is started. So it's like an issue maybe more specific to this region. And what about others? Our Latvian colleague, could you comment maybe on the issue Martynas raised, and of course other views about working with the European Public Prosecution Office?
Okay, we all know that the European Union allocates a lot of money to all the European countries, so it's very important to protect the financial interests of European Union. And our collaboration with EPPO, I would say, has been very successful. Speaking about the information which is obtained during the intelligence process, I can reveal that we have informed EPPO, I think, twice when information was obtained during the intelligence process. So basically what we did, we involved them on very early stage, on intelligence stage, to discuss what they need, what would be the threshold of the evidence to charge persons involved in possible fraud of European funds. So my conclusion is that creating EPOL was a wise decision, because there should be a specific institution responsible for fighting or protecting European Union interests, financial interests.
Yeah, everything seems very bright listening to you, but maybe you can name some remaining challenges or just space to grow, because there is always somewhere to grow.
Yeah, you're right. I would say the main challenge for us, and I believe for EPO as well, is we all understand that behind all these schemes always or almost always are public officials, and it's very hard to find proof and charge public officials for corruption offense. So that is an I would say challenge. But we could overcome it by seeking other ways to indict them for other offences which are related to their official duties. I mean, exceeding official power or abuse of office. Because I think we all understand that we won't be able to always charge public officials for corruption.
Oh yes, I agree with you, because especially when you have a very high proof or standard of proof at the national court practice or national legislation, it's an issue in Lithuania too. I have to agree with you. And maybe it's time for a view from another region, another part of Europe. So you are welcome.
Yes, thank you. So maybe from a more administrative coordination point of view, because as you may know, the AFA has no investigative powers properly, but excuse me. I think I would be given the opportunity to explain to you a bit further, even if Renārs already said a lot about AFA, but just to stick to the question of exchange of information with the EPPO. From the point of view from France was to follow the recommendation of the European Commission and be a good student, if I could say, to put in place a strategy. So we adopted a national anti-fraud strategy to prevent the fraud in the European Union interest. And so it was adopted in February 2022. And it declined in the three objectives, very classical. So the first one is based on prevent fraud by better risk management. I will develop it further. Detect fraud by strengthening the collection, sharing, and the use of the data. And the third one, you'll not be surprised, the prosecuting and the punishing fraud by improving administrative and judicial cooperation. So this strategic plan is a component with a roadmap, which is declared in 39 specific actions with either developed here. But just to tell you about the coordination between administrative systems, we created an anti-fraud interdepartmental coordination mission, the VCAF, which is an anti-fraud coordination service who will be in charge of the monitoring of the strategy. And for example, one of their first actions was to put in place a working group, very operational working group, to analyze the different types of frauds. Yesterday, I saw a presentation from the European Delegated Prosecutor talking about typology of fraud. That's one of the aims of this working group, because it involves all the actors, that are playing a role to fight against the fraud. And so, for example, you have the Treasury Director General, which is part of the Ministry of Economy, the Interdepartmental Commission for the Coordination of Control, the CICC, which you may know, who's responsible for the audits of all the authorities managing European funds, There is also the General Secretariat for European Affairs, more political members, and the law enforcement authorities. So the Central Directorate of the Judicial Police, the General Directorate of the National Gendarmerie. So there is the OCLIF. I know my colleague was invited today, but he wasn't able to be there, so I'm talking a bit on his behalf here. And the Judicial Investigation Service of the Finance Ministry, which is a bit the counterpart of part of the Guardia della Finanza that was presented yesterday with customers, tax officers, judicial officers. And of course, the European Prosecutor's Office. So this is a very new, but we have many hopes on that working group to make the analysis of fraud risks and to make emerge some pathology of fraud.
Okay, thank you. But I would like to ask you about some other aspect of the activities of the institution you represent. It may be a bit like a step side away from our topic, but I just want to use the chance, because I know that you work a lot with corruption prevention, and especially with private sector. Because why I'm asking and so interested in your activities, because here in Lithuania we have a new wording of new version of our corruption prevention law. It's rather modern, and I would say it has come into force not long ago, but it's already effective. It's already showing to be effective, I would say, but we have a lot of obligations and prevention measures and everything for the public sector, but we have only very short and unspecific norms as talking about private sector, because our politicians were not willing to create extra administrative burden for the private sector. We can work with the private sector only with very soft measures, encourage them and so on, but not to ask them to do something. As far as I'm concerned, you have a rather different situation in France, and your businesses, they have tasks, they have obligations, and you have to supervise them. So could you describe this function? Because I think it will be relatively new, not only for Lithuania, but for other colleagues from this region. So could you please?
Yes, of course. So sticking more to the AFA's missions, all right?
Yes.
Renato already told you a bit about what we do. So AFA is a nationwide service placed under the joint authority of the Ministry of Economy and the Ministry of Justice, who is aimed at preventing and detecting corruption. So what we do is that we advise and audit both the public and the private sector to make sure that they implemented the preventive framework that was imagined by the Sapin II law, which was got into force in 2016. So the Sapin II law made it mandatory for private sector and public sector, not all the private sector, only the companies that employ more than 500 workers and who have an annual turnover of 100 million euros per year. And to explain to you how it works, the Sapin II law makes it mandatory to have a preventive framework which is based on three major pillars. The one is the commitment of the top management, meaning that the top management has to have the will to prevent corruption and to put in place an effective organization, which is not a cosmetic compliance, but is really, effective and comes from the bottom up to make sure that this is an effective one. The second pillar is the risk mapping, which is the main tool that is the one we check when we are making audits in the companies and in the public sector. And the first one is the risk management. Once you have identified all the corruption risks in your service, you have to put in place some remedial measures to prevent that kind of corruption from happening. So that can be very technical, especially when it applies to big companies with subsidiaries all around the world. So we are divided in two big divisions, with the advisory division and the audit division. We are, of course, the two divisions are separated because you don't want a company who is asking for advice to be audited the next year, you know what I mean? So the two divisions are separated, but of course we work together to have the same view about the preventive framework, which comes from the law, but that we complement with our guidelines and our recommendation. We now told a bit about it earlier in the morning. So you can, of course, check on our website because they're available in English and in Spanish. So the guidelines are here to explain what we are waiting from the public and private actors by meaning what is the risk mapping, how do I do that, etc. Okay, and we have the practical guides which are more like focuses on several topics. For example, the gift policy. What do I do if someone asks me for, the examples that the presentation from Olaf was very interesting because, we make a lot of raise awareness about that, conflicts of interests, what do I accept or not, and for example, in the example, the previous example that we studied, having coffee is fine, of course, but having shopping together, it may be a difficult idea, but it seems funny that it's not as obvious for everyone. And so coming back to the European funds, we are very active in raising awareness of the people who are managing the European funds and to help them develop the culture of ethics, which is not always that simple because sometimes the questions are very tricky. Talking about the public procurement, for example, it's a very complicated matter. So we developed a guide about the public procurement, and so I think we're very the approach in France is to make the corruption risk part of an internal control approach, part of the internal control methodology.
Thank you for the detailed answer. At least for me, it was very interesting. And yes, we have where to grow with our businesses and our private sector, who are often not so willing to do all the things you mentioned. This even bigger companies. So yes, there is space to grow. But going back to investigating corruption, which has not been prevented and is already happening. Could you introduce to us the French system to detect and investigate major cases of corruption? How do you work with other institutions, and maybe you have good practices to share also from this trend of anti-corruption activities?
Yes. So, as I said, the Alpha doesn't have investigative powers, but we are officially, since the implementation of the whistleblowing directive, an external channel for alerts of whistleblowers when it comes to corruption, of course, among other authorities which cover the other areas of the criminal activities that you can denounce, not only corruption, but sticking to corruption. We are an external channel, and especially dealing with the corruption involving the European funds. Okay, so that's quite new. Even if we used to receive some alerts from the beginning of our creation, we had to put in place some very practical mechanisms, like the law obliges to put in place a voicemail. Not only the message written, but you have to be able to put a voicemail to stay anonymous if you like to. And so we receive some alerts, and when it involves some European funds, we refer the case both to the local prosecutor and the PPO. Of course, during our audits, which is another way of discovering corruption, even if our audits are not aimed at discovering corruption, bribery cases, they are just aimed at checking that the preventive framework is in place. Of course, we discover briberies all the time. And in that case, when that happens, we refer to the prosecutor's office, the EPDOs at European funds. So that's how we, from the AFA perspective, are involved to the detection of corruption. And I will say a word on behalf of my colleague who cannot be there. We have, of course, some specialized investigators and prosecutors in France since several years now. We've got a specialized office, the OCLIV. We've got the Prosecution National Financial Office, which was created in 2014. And so all that people is now specialized enough to tackle the corruption cases.
Thank you. So thank you for the introduction of our French system, but now my next step is to talk maybe about some issues about asset recovery, because major cases of corruption, if it is successful, is of course connected to illicit enrichment and usually grand illicit enrichment. Here in Lithuania, why I'm so interested in that, because here in Lithuania we have set maybe even a scope, a spectrum of various measures to find and investigate and confiscate illicit results of illicit enrichment. But our system is maybe very well developed in paper, but we don't have as many cases, as many good examples as we would like to have and to share to you today. So I will ask my colleague from Lithuanian General Prosecution Office to introduce what we have here in Lithuania, what challenges remain to recover the asset, and maybe we can share some challenges and find common solutions with our colleagues. What do you think, Martynas, on the topic?
Thank you, Rūta. As you said, of course, we have a lot of tools to recover assets, but you know, not so long time ago, OECD working group on bribery and also money vault experts have been saying that Lithuania lacks successful results in confiscation of assets, particularly corruption cases. So we actually have got only a few successful examples of illicit enrichment. Also, I would say that our courts confiscate assets in criminal cases, also not so often. So Lithuania took next step in this direction, and in year 2020 we adopted a new tool, the law on civil asset forfeiture. Under this law, prosecutor is able to commence a civil asset forfeiture procedure when a person might have more than 100,000 euros assets obtained in illegal way. It is very important to stress that it is a civil proceeding, not a criminal proceeding, and there is no presumption of innocence. So basically it is the defendant who has to prove that they had obtained their assets in a legal way. And 2 weeks, yes, it was 2 weeks ago, a court of first instance handed down a first judgment under this law, and it was very successful for the prosecutor's office. More than €500,000 was confiscated from a natural person.
Maybe you could sophisticate a bit about the merits of the case and how it was, how the possibly illicit origin of the assets was proved. What are the merits?
I'm not really familiar with the case, but I can try to tell something about it. The case started after concluding a criminal case, and in that criminal case, a person was convicted, if I'm not mistaken, of smuggling. Yes. And during that criminal investigation, it was established that the mother of the accused person had a lot of assets, and she was an older woman who wasn't working anywhere, and after the criminal case, the trial had been finished, prosecutors decided to commence a civil asset forfeiture procedure, and this woman, she actually failed to provide documents, other proof that she had earned those money, those assets in a legal way. So, as I said, civil court hearing followed, and it was quite successful.
Thank you. Of course, something else to add on the topic?
Yes, I would like to also speak about a few shortcomings of this law. It's quite new, but we already see that some things might be done better. As I said, this civil asset forfeiture procedure might be started only when the criminal procedure came to an end. And in some bigger, more sophisticated criminal cases with more defendants, such cases may last, 10 years or even longer. And so sometimes it might be an issue to keep all those allegedly illicit assets frozen for such a long period of time. So my suggestion would be make an amendment in the law and allow civil forfeiture procedure to be done parallel to criminal procedure. I don't see any harm in that. And another problem we have been facing is international cooperation. Because as you know, not all the countries have such a procedure. Under our law, Lithuanian Tax Inspectorate is an institution that provides prosecutor with final opinion whether a suspect, so-called suspect, it's not a criminal case, can prove that their assets have been obtained in a legal way. And our state tax inspectorate asked other European colleagues, also tax inspectorates, whether we could use information obtained from colleagues from abroad in civil asset forfeiture procedure. Yes, and only one state, Slovenia, said yes. A few other countries said that information provided by them can only be used in criminal proceedings. So it still remains an issue. So therefore, I would strongly recommend my colleagues in other countries to take all measures needed to introduce some civil asset forfeiture mechanism in young countries, and it would be way easier to coordinate our actions and to cooperate and find illicit assets hidden abroad.
Okay, thank you. So to comment on what you have said, that our law is not ideal, so we are working to amend it because we have a working group in General Prosecutor's Office. I'm a member of that working group too, together with Martynas and other professionals, so we hope we solve the problems which we can solve with our national legislation, because we are we Lithuanians are fond of creating laws and changing them and trying to apply them and changing them again. So yes, we will do that at national level. But what was a very sensitive aspect was touched. What about international cooperation? Because there are countries which don't have equal or similar regimes in their national systems, and there is there are problems about recognition, cross-border cooperation, exchange of evidence, and so on appears, and they are more severe than in a classical criminal procedure, I would say. So here I would like to move to our colleagues from other countries to ask the same question about how they deal with asset recovery issues in their countries. And of course, if you can, to comment on the sensitive topic Martynas has touched.
Thank you. Maybe I'll just explain a bit from the Estonian point of view, since European delegated prosecutors, though belonging to this European office, all conduct criminal investigations according to the national law, and also take cases to national courts and have to apply national criminal procedure law. So these questions are also very important, also asset recovery in all EU cases where real damage has occurred. In the case of an attempt, this is not maybe so big of a problem to find assets, but in the case of a damage, EPPO supports in every case that the possibility to find assets and the possibility to seize assets in order to remunerate the damage is always has to be done. So in Estonia, in comparison to this Euro-Lithuanian special way how to take away illicit assets, we have a special procedure in our criminal procedure law, confiscation procedure, that is a special procedure that can be run parallel to criminal procedure, but since, yes, as you said, sometimes the research, analysis and finding the assets takes more time. They do not have to be taken to court at the same time. The main investigation, the suspicion and accusation part can be taken to court separately, and this confiscation procedure can be taken separately. But this is a part of our criminal procedure law, so I would say this is our applies criminal investigation to that procedure, not civil procedure.
But what about the standard of proof? Is it that of a criminal case or more like in civil cases or somewhere in between?
You can use in that confiscation procedure the evidence to prove that these illicit assets have become from a criminal activity, as you can use in the main case. So let's say that standard of proof is quite high. But in Estonia, we have 3 different ways to confiscate. One is the means of commencing the crime, then proceeds derived from criminal activity, and then this is possible to seize assets by way of an excessive confiscation if you see that the standard of living of a suspect and the criminal assets he has and the legal way of having your income, they are so much apart that you can say that he mostly has criminal assets, but this connection between these criminal assets and between the crime has to be shown. But
it's like a lifestyle confiscation, but you don't have to show that a concrete asset comes from a concrete illicit action.
Yeah, but this has to be foreseen in penal code that according to specific crime, for example corruption, this kind of seizure of assets is possible. So in some way it has to be connected to a crime, to the way a person has committed a crime. For example, criminal organization, corruption, also fraud, that your way of committing a crime leads to believe that these assets that you have is your way of living, that you have commenced them through illegal activity.
Okay, but am I right to understand that you have to connect the asset you are willing to confiscate to a sort of crime, but not a concrete episode of that?
Yes. And
Okay.
then we have a reversed burden of proof. In this spread confiscation deal, then the suspect has to prove that he has obtained all assets legally. Then we can't seize or confiscate them. But then this is a reversed burden of proof. It goes this is the obligation of the suspect.
Okay, very, very interesting. Thank you for the specification. And do you have any successful example cases?
As of April practice, no. Not yet.
But in Estonia, national practice.
I can't draw any specific practice right now, but I believe, my colleague prosecutors surely have had successful practices on that field also.
Okay, so it's not only in paper,
Not only in
these
paper,
norms.
Yeah,
Okay.
these kind of applications to court to arrest assets, to grant the possibility to confiscate in a way of a lifestyle. These applications are quite often to court.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. It was very interesting. There are things to learn for us from you. And what about you?
Situation in Latvia is very similar to Estonia. I think we are talking here about non-conviction-based confiscation, which are not.
No conviction-based confiscation we don't have.
Okay, that's a slight difference in Latvia because we have so-called non-conviction-based confiscation, which means that you don't need to wait for the final decision of the court. You can go with confiscation of assets on parallelly while conducting the investigation. And speaking about practical or successful examples, yeah, I can mention that in 2021 you confiscated in such a way 5 million euros
Oh, more detail, please.
for the state, yeah, because all the money was frozen in Latvian bank accounts, and the nature of so I mean the origin of the money, of course, was illegal.
And what kind of crime connected to corruption? In
It's
some way?
again similar to Estonia. You just need to have a predicate offense. At least it doesn't matter what is. In these cases, we assume that it's corruption because money is coming from corruption, and we were able to confiscate all the money.
Okay, thank you. And it's only one example, or do you have developed practice on this?
There were several examples. What I want to say, this works in really in practice, but also I have to mention that now there are several complaints in Constitutional Court about it because I think we could be all in trouble if the person will be acquitted later. So
What do you mean in trouble?
I don't know. That's a future challenge, yeah, because the money already is confiscated, and there is. I think we all understand that there is always a possibility, even a slight possibility, that the defendant might be acquitted. So I think that's a future challenge for all of us.
Oh, I understand. We have a lot of also some disputes in our constitutional court. I hope that the constitutional court of your country will be willing and able to understand the issues, and then it will be Okay, I cannot comment on future court decisions. Of course, it would be unacceptable, but we all understand what we are hoping for. So, okay, and our final panelist, do you have something to share about asset recovery in your country?
Yes, thank you very much. In France, we have some similar mechanisms. I think that what I understood from the debates about the general confiscation, is that it? The spread confiscation? Yeah, we have that kind of mechanism, and but you have to be indicted for certain kind of offences. I'm not sure corruption is one of them, but certainly the money laundering, which is always prosecuted with the corruption, bribery, can lead to the confiscation of all the assets, and you don't even have to prove that the assets come from offences. So that's the theory, because in the practice you have to convince the judge to pronounce that kind of sanction, which is very, very severe.
But excuse me.
No, sure. I just wanted to say that there may be a difference between the treatment of economic financial crimes and, the narcotic crimes, traffic drugs. In the drug trafficking, the judge doesn't hesitate to confiscate all the assets, even if they don't come from offences. In the financial and economic offences, it's not the same story, So even if you have the evidence of the committed crime, the judge will have a tendency to confiscate only the assets who come from the crime itself.
Am I right to understand that the proof of standard is a bit different for those street gangs and white-collar crimes?
The proof of standard is the same. It's just
in theory.
Yes.
But in practice.
In practice, it's not the same.
Okay.
Something I wanted to share, if you allow me.
Sure.
Because I don't know if your countries have that kind of system. In France, we have we're fond of agencies in France. So we have the French Agency for the Recovery and Confiscation of Assets, the AGRAS, which was created in 2010. And it's a very effective and efficient central authority who is here to centralize all the assets that are seized and that will be confiscated by the judge, because the investigations can be long, and sometimes you have to manage the property, some estate properties or some fancy cars that you have to sometimes to sell them before they lose some values, So the AGRAS is there to do it, and it's very easier for international cooperation, to identify the assets, to give advice to the investigators and the prosecutors, because they have an international cooperation division. And it's a unique, account. So typically, you transfer the money on the account of the AGRAS. Sometimes some states at the beginning were a bit reluctant because they didn't know where the money went, but now they're really used to it, and it's a very effective tool to use. We also have the platform of identification of the criminal assets, which is more like a financial unit to help identify the assets. So that the two of them works really great. Just to give you a number, in 2019, I don't have the numbers for the recent years, but in 2019, 253 million euros were confiscated in France dealt by the AGRAS.
Very interesting, but could you specify, you mentioned that you have to be indicted for some specific crime. Is it enough to indict a person, or does he have to be convicted for it to be possible to apply the procedure you just described?
Of course, for the confiscation, the first step is the seizure, so indictment is enough. Sometimes not even indictment, sometimes just custody is enough to seize. You can seize at the very beginning, and it's better for you to do it at the very beginning before the money spreads away. So you seize the money, you seize assets. It's just a temporary order, so it's not it has to be confirmed further on by the confiscation. So confiscation requires, of course, conviction by the courts, okay? But in the meantime, if you demonstrate that, for example, you have to it goes in the interest of the perpetrators to have these very value assets handled, for example, the fancy car that I described. If you don't sell it, it will lose 100,000 euros from its value, So in that case, you have to demonstrate during the investigation, and you can sell it before the confiscation is pronounced by the judge.
Okay, thank you. And final question, the procedure itself, is it kind of criminal procedure, or is it some kind of civil procedure which can be which can go on at the same time as a criminal procedure?
No, I think it's a criminal procedure. We don't have civil confiscation.
Okay, thank you.